I was born by the river in a little tent, just like the river. I've been running ever since. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. Oh, it's too hard living, and I'm afraid to die. I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. I was traveling along with that song for a little while, and then Mika and I watched a little Netflix show that was predicated on a mythical, fictional evening of spent with Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X and Sam Cooke. And in fact, he's being ribbed by the other brothers about singing his happy sappy, songs, and that's what provokes him to sing that song, which is a kind of a lament in that it chronicles some of the pain and the difficulty, but it affirms that there is agency in the universe that is bringing about change. Martin Luther King loved to quote Reinhold Niebuhr saying that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So good afternoon, friends. It's great to be here. You know, my name's Carl, and I'm a Cradle Quaker. I'm a member of Strawberry Creek Friends Meeting in Berkeley, California. And I like to let folks know that that meeting has provided me with an anchor committee, which is kind of like a clearness committee that doesn't end. And that has supported my public ministry and my work as a hospice and palliative care chaplain for about a decade now. And that's Rachel Finley and Sally Heineman and John McCarthy and Elaine Emily. And I know John and Elaine are here with us today. And I also want to thank and recognize my elder, Valerie Nutman. And we sometimes think that Quaker eldering is about finger wagging and telling people that they have too much lace on their curtains. But what it really is a kind of spiritual accompaniment. And Valerie is holding us in prayer and keeping that channel open to the deep well that we seek to draw on as friends when we minister. So I want to very sincerely thank you all for inviting me to this Eugene Friends Meeting annual retreat. It's been a delight to participate in your spiritual community. You really have a lot of wisdom and compassion and humor among you. It's really nice to see that. And I also want to presence and thank Helen Dart for being available to offer soul care for any who might feel that they're in need. I would encourage you to reach out to friend Dart if you're feeling a little unsettled, or just there's some part of your spirit that could use some tending. Now, I want to say that like a lot of gifts, they don't necessarily immediately present themselves as a joyful or beautiful thing. So the gift to pause at this particular point in history and wrestle with the theme of reflecting on the past, being in the present, and hope for the future. How is the divine working in our lives? didn't immediately strike me as a, a wonderful gift. What Cynthia initially sent me by email was that they were hoping that I could speak on the topic of hope, building bridges, community, vision, and then parentheses, something like that. And this is where I was a little stymied. I was a little nonplussed. I was daunted even. When Cynthia reached out in October of last year, I was still working with lamentation, and I work with lamentation all the time. But I was really focused, and I had whammied myself by watching the George Floyd video, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And I mentioned that last night, and it really triggered this kind of racial memory. You know, they've now confirmed that the science of epigenetics shows that trauma gets encoded in our genes. And it really got triggered for me. It got activated. And my grave concern for my two sons, who are my complexion, you know, the pandemic was raging. In October, I don't think we had any sense that vaccines were right around the corner. I think, in fact, folks were warning us that vaccines might take a lot longer. The police were killing unarmed Black folks, despite all the attention that was being paid to exactly that outrage. Civil unrest was bubbling. As you're aware, Portland was on fire. The economy was crushing the working class, while billionaires actually made more money in the pandemic year than the year before. There were refugees who were drowning in the Mediterranean Sea trying to get to Europe. The reports on the loss of Arctic ice were staggering, even to me, and I've been an earthquaker and sort of focused on eco-spirituality and earth care for 25 years and more. And of course, just the rampant mendacity and incompetence and white supremacy that flowed out of the White House and poisoned our body politic and our society at large. So this request from your meeting to gestate a message about hope was a saving gift to me, friends. It made me dive deep. Wasn't just easy. Now, as I mentioned, my day job for the last 10 years or so has been to provide spiritual accompaniment to those with life-limiting illness. It's mostly cancer, but also heart failure, lung failure, the neurological diseases of ALS and MS and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Palliative care includes hospice care, but it is sort of pre-hospice care as well. And so it focuses on symptom management rather than curing disease. The curing of the disease is handled by the specialist. And palliative care patients are not necessarily terminally ill, although life is a terminal condition for all of us. And some of them will have so much healing and recovery that they will go off of our service, and they may live for many years. So it's not the same as hospice, though it includes hospice. We take this very whole person approach to care of people. We don't just consider them in terms of their blood and bone. And we often cite Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you may remember. It's a little pyramid diagram with 5 levels of human needs. And our team includes a nurse and a social worker and a physician, and we overlap here and there, but it also includes the chaplain. And the chaplain has the privilege of focusing our efforts or our attention at the upper parts of that hierarchy of needs. The bottom of the pyramid is physiological needs: food, water, shelter, medicine. And then there's safety, which starts already to be spiritual. And then we get to love and belonging. and then self-esteem, and then self-realization is the top of the pyramid. And I think what has drawn me to this work over the years is that when we are faced with our mortality, there are levels of spiritual depth and growth that become accessible, that theoretically are always accessible. I think that's why we have instructions, for instance, to die in the spirit and things like that. The symbolic meaning of the cross, as early friends would talk about, taking up one's cross, to crucify that part of ourselves, to allow death to liberate us in the midst of life. But certainly a real honest to Pete medical diagnosis does help people to find to activate spiritual growth and spiritual capacities that may have been sort of dormant. So I'm telling you all this just to give a context for our conversation about hope. I am not an expert, either professionally or by my personal nature, of warm, fuzzy blanket hope. I don't think anyone needs to work too hard at warm, fuzzy blanket hope anyway. What I have been is an explorer of a kind of rugged and hard-earned hope. I want to share with you what I've learned from the souls that I have accompanied in their struggles with mortality and hope, finding it and losing it, finding it again, shaping it intentionally, sharing it, and practicing hope as a spiritual discipline. Hope is tougher than we sometimes think. It's unsinkable, really. Hope floats. So we're going to approach it in a kind of 4 categories. I know some people like to know that there's a format, and then we're going to sort of open it up for some discussion. So the first is hope in the face of disaster, and then the simple question, what is hope? And then hope as a practice, an intentional practice, and then the query, from whence cometh your hope? So hope in the face of disaster. So from dizzy spells to forgetting where you're driving, or coughing up blood, stroke, heart attack, a suspicious lump, the journeys of the folks that I work with usually start with a disaster, a natural disaster. Indeed, looking at the brain scan of a person who has had a massive hemorrhagic stroke is much like looking at an aerial photo of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. A levee has given way and chaos floods what was ordered. But usually, and New Orleans is no exception, the problem was lurking there under the surface unacknowledged for a long time, perhaps in the genes. For surely by now we can acknowledge that racism, which exacerbated the trouble in New Orleans, is written into the American genome. So the disaster, which seems at first to have snatched hope away, actually contains the seeds of hope for healing, for wholeness, for another way of being. Though the physical body may eventually succumb to disease, I have seen again and again how the spiritual life can become more whole, more peaceful, more compassionate towards self and others, and more fully realized because, and not in spite of the disaster that first revealed the trouble. Now, I believe that what we are now experiencing is what it is to take a good look at a CAT scan of the organ of our American society. And it's pretty terrifying. We're in the midst of what the writer Joanna Macy calls a great turning, from the industrial growth society to the life-sustaining society. She gives it a mythical kind of a scope so that there's a story engaged in it so that we can attach our unconscious mind and our symbolic mind and our spirit to the journey that we're on, because the intellect is a very, very poor tool in transforming much of anything. Now, our Quaker forebears wouldn't have said industrial growth society and life-sustaining society. They would have talked about the principalities and powers which the Apostle Paul warns us about, and the kingdom of heaven, which Jesus told them was among them, just waiting to be born. This great turning starts with what Macy calls the great unraveling. Is that a good way to describe our moment in history? It really felt that way on January 6th. Things are coming apart. So hope is right there in the midst of the disaster. It's woven through. It is the recognition of this paradox that has caused people to tell me, that's people I've cared for, I'm grateful that I got cancer. Without it, I never would have known what was possible. And a patient who was exactly my age 2 years ago, he was very active. He was a surfer and an outdoorsman. And he got ALS, which actually very strong, physically capable people are slightly more susceptible to for some reason. And just before he became so paralyzed that he was communicating with me by blinking at a retinal scanner that would pick out the letters of the alphabet so that they would form words on the screen. When I asked him how he was, he said, I feel very fortunate. He was a non-theist, by the way. Just for in case there are non-theists in the room who want to think they might be an exception. So a simple illustrative point about this disaster and the opportunity that's within it. Let us just briefly consider a contemporary problem in the health of our society, okay? We will call it the malignant tumor of Trumpism. So suppose that Hillary Clinton had won the presidency in 2016. Also assume that her style would have been some amalgam of Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. We'd have spent the last 4 years mostly passively wishing that things would get better with a completely constipated legislature, although a less scary Supreme Court. And like the disciples at the Garden of Gethsemane, mostly we'd be asleep. But the Trump tumor immediately gave us the Me Too movement. It gave us Black Lives Matter, the exhumation and examination of the racist DNA of this American experiment in democracy, which was explored by the New York Times 1619 Project and other things. The Black civil rights movement has become radically less homophobic over the last 4 years, welcoming and including LGBT persons in a way that it previously didn't. The world has stopped looking to the United States as a leader, and the possibility of a better international community with real give and take has been made possible by the maleficence and incompetence of the administration that's just passed. Voting apathy is no longer in vogue. Capitalism can once again be critiqued. You may be accused of being a socialist, but at least it's on the table. The desire to get out of endless wars has been expressed across the entire political spectrum. I feel like those of us who have been lobbying for peace for a lot of years have failed to notice that the so-called political right is also fed up with endless wars. Florida passed a $15 minimum wage at the same time that they voted for Trump. There are more women in Congress than ever before, and I believe that that is not only evidence of change, but that it contains enormous potential for change. Industry has started its own environmental innovation in the absence of having a regulatory system to fight against. And white folks, maybe some white folks that you are sitting next to right now, if only in a tic-tac-toe board, are learning about and examining their own white privilege and having book groups and working on dismantling all of those kinds of things. Science is now regarded as an essential guide to policy by people of goodwill, and giving equal time to alternative facts is a thing of the past, as we saw when some of the major networks just cut away from claims of electoral malfeasance. We don't even have to cover it. It's a fiction, right? So this Trump tumor was an enormous blessing in disguise, friends. Thanks be to God that 4 years of chaos and damage was enough for us to wake up, because it's also probably true that another 4 years would have been fatal. So that's an example of how hope lives in disaster. It's tempered and honed as we stay awake in the face of chaos and suffering. Catastrophe creates a space for us to dig down. It makes an opening in what we think we know. T.S. Eliot said it in poetry, and I love poetry because it sort of engages my whole soul and not just my brain. I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope, for hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing. There is yet faith, but the faith and the love and the hope are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing. Whisper of running streams and winter lightning, the wild thyme unseen and the wild strawberry. The laughter in the garden echoed ecstasy, not lost, but requiring, pointing to the agony of death and birth. I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope, for hope would be hope for the wrong thing. So what is hope? I was told to go easy on the scripture here, so I won't dig into the 7 Hebrew words which are used to denote hope in the Bible. The 2 takeaways that have meaning for us here today are that some of those Hebrew words, just like our English word hope, are used both as a noun and as a verb in different contexts. That is, we hope and we have or lack hope. The second thing to understand is that hope is not wishing. It's not passive. Now, in some ways, those Hebrews had a little advantage over us in practicing what I'll call deep hope, spiritual hope, the hope that my patients find in the face of a dire prognosis. I see the same thing in my African-American forebears brought to this country in the holds of slave ships to live as chattel, motivated to work by a threat of punishment until they died young. The advantage that these 2 groups had, 3 groups, I guess, if we include the folks that I care for, was the awareness that the world they inhabited was not their source of hope. Disease and injury killed more people all the time, and medical treatment in those days often caused more harm than good. Infant and child mortality, which we consider an affront to the order of the universe, was extremely high. Food insecurity was a constant. People did not exceed the social station of their parents. Technology did not develop at a pace that was looked to for solutions to, that anyone looked to it for solutions to human suffering. The people had little or no say in their government, and for both Hebrews and African Americans, violence was a constant threat. Hope had to come from a deeper source than the world around them. This is what happens when those I care for stop hoping only for a medical cure for their disease. They start to look deeper, opening themselves to deep hope. It's never been as difficult in our history to die well as it is now. That's not intuitive. Let me say it again. It has never been as difficult to die well as it is now. And that's because there are all kinds of things to have hope in at the level of the world. You know, when George Fox says to walk cheerfully over the world, answering that of God and everyone, it's kind of the meaning of trampling the world underneath. We were not to look to the world for some of these forms of meaning, to be in the world maybe, but not of it. Though chemotherapy and radiation and surgeries such as radical mastectomy often cause more suffering than the cancer they treat, they are still effective treatments and they buy us time. New technologies come along constantly. There's always a study at Stanford or at the Mayo Clinic, right? And we hope to survive long enough for one of those to result in a cure for what ails us. When dialysis was invented, it was thought that it would help a few hundred people in any given year. But now 500,000 Americans are on dialysis constantly, and that number goes up as diabetes has its way with us. We have before us the example, you could call it a miracle, I would call it a miracle, of a 95% effective vaccine against COVID-19 developed in about a year, right? That I got mine. I got mine last week. My shoulder still hurts a little bit. That kind of beautiful, miraculous gift often helps us to keep our focus here on some immediate medical, technological, or scientific fix. This feeds our delusion of and our addiction to the drug of control. It keeps us as the center of our universe. It mitigates the disaster that leads us to the reliance on spirit. So, because mortality is inevitable for all of us, the necessity of finding hope in the midst of despair attends all of us and is actually the beginning of the Quaker faith. Deep hope as a conscious choice. You remember this from George Fox's journal, where he wrote that he had gone here and there, reading this and that, meeting with the priests. He writes in his journal, "When all my hopes in all men were gone, so that I had nothing outwardly to help me, oh, then I heard a voice which said, there is one, even Christ Jesus, that can speak to thy condition. And when I heard it, my heart did leap for joy." He goes right into this pit of despair in which he has a realization that brings him to joy. That's the paradox that we're living in now. So from looking for hope in all the wrong places, Fox surrenders to not knowing, and then this deep joy comes. So our next section is hope as a practice. I'm aware of my time. I think I'm okay. Hope as a practice. Hope is a verb. To hope. To consciously choose hope, regardless of the conditions around us, whether physical decline or social disintegration, whatever the chaos. The Greek word for hope in the New Testament is elpis. I'm not gonna exegete it, but it's used as hope in, hope on, but not hope for. So we rest our heart in or on that which gives us hope. Now, Quakerism has been described as a naively hopeful faith path. It's got this outrageous belief that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and the purpose of our life is to make that shalom, that peace, manifest here on earth in our lifetime. Early friends believed that they could transcend their own selfishness and sinfulness. Fox says, I was in that state that Adam was in before the fall. And I'll tell you, I am actively hoping that this is true. This hope for wholeness is the source of our belief in the equality of persons, the possibility of a world without war and an earth restored. If it is foolishness, well, I pray that I may be ever more a fool for God. It is scary to hope, because by hoping, we risk disappointment. We fear that if our heart breaks, it will never heal. When we hope intentionally, resting the hope of our heart on the altar of an ongoing creation, a creation that we participate in, that is ever unfolding, then our heart only breaks open so that we can fit the whole world inside of it. But we're not destroyed. We practice this hope, this reliance, in our weekly worship. And I had written this before Ethan's ministry in the previous worship. But if you recall, Z was talking about feeling the need to for a more confident expectation. Those are the words that Z used. Now, it saddens me that we too often refer to our practice as silent worship, as though the absence of sound or speech was the point. The silence is just a result of this expectant waiting on spirit to manifest in the midst of us. We keep our lamps full, confident that this direct encounter is a reality, even the ultimate reality. Meeting for worship is also a meeting of hoping. In 1937, on the eve of World War II, Rufus Jones said it this way: "Early friends made the discovery that silence is one of the best preparations for communion with God and for the reception of inspiration and guidance. Silence itself, of course, has no magic. It may be just sheer emptiness, absence of words or noise or music, but it may be an intensified pause, a vitalized hush, a creative quiet, an actual moment of mutual and reciprocal correspondence with God. We're practicing hope when we sit and worship. Let us be the religious society of friends of hope." Now, what I next want to talk about in this question of agency and practice is a few simple practices that I have noticed the folks that I work with who are enlarged in the midst of their physical failing um, that they practice. And because we're all mortal, these practices are relevant to all of us. The first is grieving what is lost. And I was really grateful that Cynthia brought that lamentation practice this morning in a way that I could just attend it and wasn't trying to carry it. And some of the things that we may find ourselves losing, some of the losses that have been most difficult for me have been precious delusions and false hopes. For instance, in the inevitability of a progressive progression of history. The arc of history is long and it bends towards justice is a beautiful phrase, but it's been hard to believe in it lately. So I commend to you this practice of grieving well and consciously. The second is to practice ambivalence. We don't like ambivalence. The ego doesn't like ambivalence. Our American culture doesn't like ambivalence. But I tell you, ambivalence has got a genius in it. From whence does your hope come? Well, don't muddle around in the middle, being afraid to sort of see it in any particular way, but liberate your imagination to go thoroughly down these different pathways. This can bring clarity and relief and meaning and direction and creative insight. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Name your fears and then steal their power to paralyze you. Write your will and your advanced care directive and then plan to live forever. Entertain the notion that you don't know everything and you don't believe everything you think. But whether we are putting our faith in Biden and hope in Biden or despairing in Trump, either one is a form of idolatry, looking for hope in the world that is not to be found here. We have to excise those hopes and fears by entertaining the full spectrum. The third is keeping things good in the present moment. And this is just much easier with someone who's been told that they might have weeks to months to live. But the present moment is all that we really have. So right now is a great time for you to stop doom scrolling through the terrifying news on your phone or indulging your energizing sense of outrage and especially hating or fearing anybody. As Fannie Lou Hamer, my name is Fannie Lou Hamer, says, in the face of violence and hate, she says, you just got to love them, baby. Hate will wear you out. So let go of all that and just de-escalate your nervous system, because it's designed to keep you safe from saber-toothed tigers, but not from creeping fascism. And it can't handle being ramped up at that level so constantly. Early friends practice the use of a hedge to nurture a space for spiritual wellness. And that hedge, I like hedge rather than fence, because a hedge is permeable, right? And it provides shelter for that which is living, and it's living itself. So a hedge, and that hedge might include signing out of our social media. It might include spiritual reading or walking in the woods, time spent with friends. I have a very, very grouchy guy that I work with, and I asked him about his prayer life, because he has a prayer life, but it comes and goes. And I said to him, have you been praying during this difficult time? And he laughed. And he said, it isn't really like I take time to pray. It's more like I'm just talking to God all the time. And I exclaimed, well, it's prayer without ceasing, just like in Thessalonians. And he said, I guess so. And so there's the practices and the hedges, the shape that we create in our life to help us to put God at the center. Fourth is gratitude, and we did a little gratitude with the lamentation. I just want to say gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. The glass is half full, which is way better than completely empty. You should put on your rose-colored glasses and wear them all the time. I sometimes lose mine, and I look around, I have to find them and put them back on. And to count our blessings. This is where we right size and sacralize our worldly and spiritual sources of hope. We're grateful for the company of a cat during COVID, a majority in the Senate, rain on our vegetable garden, the Moonlight Sonata. Now, this simple practice, which your grandmother knew the wisdom of, is accessible when we are at a nadir. Some spiritual practices, I feel like they expect us to be in such a state of enlightenment and beatitude to even engage them. But I think gratitude the latter comes way, way, way down to me, even when I'm just in that pit, and I can practice it if I just remember. It has the power to bring us all the way up into a state of grace, though. It's not something that'll just get you a little off the floor. It can get you where you need to go. So I give you an example. I recently met a 63-year-old woman, Lydia. I'm calling her Lydia. Medical privacy requires me to make up a name. But she has suffered a debilitating stroke on top of her pulmonary disease, her diabetes, her marginal kidneys, and her arthritis. She'd had to quit her job and move in with her daughter, who is a busy single mother of two. Lydia uses her walker on good days and a wheelchair on bad days. She's lost so much weight that her 11-year-old grandson can push her in her wheelchair to the park where she feeds the birds. She has just gone on permanent disability, which required recognizing that she will not be able to go back to work. So she's had this disaster, right? We could call it a disaster, but we could also call it an apocalypse or a revelation, a lifting of the veil to show what is true. When I asked Lydia how she was faring in the midst of these changes, she said, I'm so blessed. She's healing her troubled relationship with her daughter, and the income that she brings into their shared household is easing financial stresses for all of them. She's grateful that she can propel herself in her wheelchair or her walker, because it means she can take herself to the bathroom. She can make her own bed, and she can chase the afternoon sunlight as it crosses the room. She's getting to know her grandson, who reminds her of her husband, who died a few years ago. She celebrates the physical strength and freedom of the birds that she feeds. She loved birds long before now, but she likes to feed them, and as they fly down to where she sits and fly away again, she can appreciate the strength and power and beauty and freedom they have that she now understands on a different level. She feels the space that her work took up opening inside of herself, and is making a space for the sacred there. And then she said, I'm grateful to be having this conversation with you. And I said, I'm grateful for that too, Lydia. Thank you. One of the nice things about spiritual care is at some point you realize it's completely reciprocal and not a one-way street. Another patient told me that she'd been praying that God would let her walk. She was diagnosed with MS 20 years ago and has lost the use of her legs. She said, I realized that he has answered my prayer. He's letting me walk every night. Every night in my dreams, I walk and run and swim and ride horses. My prayer is answered whenever I close my eyes. So folks learn to count blessings and to find blessings and to celebrate and name them. And it's liberating. And I think it banishes fear. A fifth practice is meaning making. And Viktor Frankl has written the book literally on meaning making. But I want to say that when you are making meaning, it doesn't need to make any kind of logical sense. That's not important. And it can be very, very simple, and it can change as time goes on. But to find meaning in things, and we heard some of that over the last day, that people are finding meaning and value in things, and sharing that with others. Now, the sixth is a tricky one for Quakers because we have a tendency towards an addiction here. An addiction is anything that gets in between yourself and spirit. And this is to do what you can and what you are called to do. And sometimes we don't want to sit with the pain of the world. We want to, do something. But I echo the dictum, don't just do something, sit there. Howard Thurman, who studied with Rufus Jones at Haverford, said, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. A particular concern may rest in your heart, announcing itself as your work to do. And doing what we can for tikkun olam, the healing of the world in Hebrew, helps us to feel more hopeful, not because of any outcome that may come. That's where we make the mistake. But because we are enacting and inhabiting deep hope just by working towards the possibility. That work could be inward work as well. And many who have carried debilitating trauma all their lives have a chance to heal it when they encounter their own mortality. The teaching of Tikkun Olam is that if the universe is healed anywhere in any small part, it is healed to some small degree in every part. The seventh and last is relationships. This is almost all anyone talks about when they are really on their deathbed. Family and friends, people they have known, lives which have intersected their own. Even if they did some kind of amazing, meaningful work, invented a surgery that saved lives and prevented suffering, say, what they will talk about is what it was like to be part of that team. People do courageous relationship repair at the end of their life as well. And I often think, why wait until there's so little time left to send a letter to your sister saying, you're sorry that you haven't spoken in 20 years? And then there's so little time to be in that repaired relationship. We can do that work now today. We suffer an epidemic of loneliness in these times. And while Zoom has been a gift during this pandemic, our electronica is not preventing our growing more alone. In the face of life-limiting illness, relationships may fall away, but others become profoundly connected. And often those are solemnized. This is another piece that we skip. Named and celebrated and ritualized. It's important to recognize that a friend is a dear friend and to say what that relationship means. So, so part of the secret to what causes the enriching of those relationships is that when we suffer, we experience compassion from others if we're lucky. But whether we do or not, we learn the true value of compassion and we enlarge our capacity to extend it to others. And that's what opens the heart, that compassion, and risks intimacy. And that is what brings healing. So in conclusion, I want to talk about surrender. My brother, Dr. Zachary Moon, who is also a chaplain, was helping me to clarify some ministry a while ago. And he asked me, well, what's the core message? What's your core message? I said, well, it's the same as it always is. To surrender to the mystery, to encounter the divine directly, and to be transformed by it. That is the opportunity that we're given in this world. And I'm going to give you an example of it that I was struck by once again very recently. And it's an example of someone who's working in the world, who's stymied by the world, who feels a sense of hopelessness that he talks about at times, had some early success and then really got stuck, but who had by that time become completely surrendered. And so that his faithfulness to what love required of him was the measure of what mattered. And being safe, fixing anything, being thought of in a particular way, all of those things had fallen away, even though he didn't have a terminal diagnosis. And so I just want us to share this. It's not very long. Oh, my head is enormous. Sorry. I'm going to share screen. Is that going to work for us, Sim? I can't hear anybody.
You should be able to share screen.
Okay. You've heard this before. I just want you to listen to it as deeply as you can just in this moment.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
I don't know. I have to stop share. Sorry. I don't know if you've spent much time in Black church, but Martin Luther King walks away from the podium, and one of his compatriots puts his arms around him and it kind of helps him to fall into a chair. He's completely, his legs have come out from under him. That is the kind of hope that is possible when we give ourselves over entirely to being God-filled. And I will tell you that I have not arrived. Not arrived. So what there is confident, expectant waiting that transformation is possible in me, and it is possible in all of you, and it is possible in us as a community, that our Quaker community becomes a petri dish of hope and transformation. So if you would just join me, I pray out loud. I will say, as a cradle Quaker, that was really weird to me when I started in chaplaincy. But if you would join me just in a word of prayer. Spirit of love and light, we are thankful for the opportunity to come together today as a circle of caring, as a group of martyrs, that is, witnesses who can witness to one another that of God that resides within each of us. We ask for continued strength, that our hope be ever renewed, for we are walking through a treacherous and a difficult time, and we aspire to be agents of divine love in a broken world. But we are ourselves also broken and in pain, and we offer up that pain and brokenness for healing and wholeness. Amen. I think if we sit in some silence, in the expectant, waiting, hopeful worship that is our practice, there may be some words that come out of that. There may be a query for me, which I'm happy to respond to. And I will just, I'll just close with this. Oh, there have been times that I thought I couldn't last for long, but now I think I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will.